What's up, everybody? It's Jared with Capture the Magic, and with the recent Themed Entertainment Association's attendance numbers for 2024 showing basically what we had assumed would be the case, that Disney's attendance was flat, and Universal Studios saw a decline in their attendance before Epic Universe opened. But what will Universal's attendance look like in the coming years, and what are some challenges that they could face? Because obviously Epic Universe is going to help bolster their attendance, but what are the limitations of the current Islands of Adventure and Universal Studios offerings, and is Universal going to be able to bring those parks up that will reflect on the attendance, as they're obviously going to be battling with Disney for the next decade or longer when it comes to the theme park battles? Also, could Comcast end up with some Warner Brother properties, as that studio is for sale, and could that play a role into the future, and what might this look like in the next few years? So that's what we're going to talk about in the video today.
I have a question for you guys, because after the pandy, right? After the lockdowns, I know we were locked down a lot longer out here in California than you guys were out there in Florida, but after the pandy, I feel like for a couple of years or a few years after everything kind of started getting back on track, like 2001, 2002, Universal kind of went through like a surge. I felt like Universal was more en vogue, more like it was more attractive. I feel like a lot of the Disney, the new Disney stuff that they were kind of introducing kind of turned a lot of people off, right? During that era, and Universal was sort of surging. Do you think these 2004 numbers, the dip, is in part, because of that? Like, because I think they kind of they went so high right after the pandy, and then it's kind of like coming back down to earth a little bit? Or do you think this is more Epic Universe preparation, where people are like, you know what, the new park's opening in the next year, let's just wait? Or it's a little bit of both? What do you think?
I kind of think it's a little bit of both, because you also had whatever Revenge Travel, and as that declined, as well as you add in, you got a new park opening within, especially once you get to like 1 to 2 years out from something big opening. I think in the short term, you always were going to run that risk of people waiting to go. Because if you're going to drop all the money that you're going to spend on a vacation, it makes sense to be like, well, let's just wait until this stuff is done, then we'll go, which I think is also something that happened at Disney with all the stuff they're building as well. But I think it could be those two things combined. But I'm not really good at predicting numbers, but I was expecting Universal to be down simply because Epic was going to open that next year. And so I think a lot of, at least in Orlando for Universal, it was a lot of APs that were going. I mean, you had DreamWorks Land open, but that didn't have a lot of budget. You had Villains Con open, but for the most part, all the money and effort was going into Epic. And so they didn't have really anything new on top of that too. And I think that's probably what, at least in my opinion, why those numbers are down.
Well, and another thing too that we have to also consider, even 2025's numbers aren't really going to give us a good snapshot, or a good, I shouldn't say snapshot, a good big picture of the Epic Universe impact, because Epic Universe, they were dealing with attendance caps. Universal was capping the attendance for the first, and it didn't even open until May officially.
Well, and they're still capping the attendance there. I mean, I did the math. I think the most you will see from Epic Universe, and they're not going to make that top 10 list in 2025. The most you'll see from Epic at this point, my guess is somewhere maybe north of 3 million guests for Epic. But I do think you're going to see that bump up the Universal other parks. I think they are going to see an uptick in the attendance there off of it. But I don't think you see Epic pop up into that list. I mean, 2027, 2028, maybe. It just really depends on where they can get the park capacity at, because you're not going to break any attendance records having less than 20,000 people in your park.
Well, right. And this park is really like, it was always going to be a long-term thing.
Yeah.
Like, whenever you have a new park introduced into the equation, that's an investment for the future, essentially. You know what I'm saying? So you might have some short-term pain a little bit, the growing pains, the new thing or whatever, but long-term, it's going to pan out and pay off for them, I think,
I agree. Slimer, what do you think?
And well, listen, looking at these numbers here, because I'd been looking at them this morning, what's really interesting is that Universal Studios, the original park, was actually able to stave off a lower dip in attendance than Islands of Adventure. Now, you wouldn't think that'd be the case, because Islands of Adventure is the newer park. It's got some of the bigger IP like Jurassic Park. It's got the new-ish Velocicoaster and Hagrid's. But Halloween Horror Nights, pulls through, and so did the Summer Movie Mega Parade. So
Wow.
those things, those things kept the attendance from dropping by a little bit over 50% when compared to Islands of Adventure. Now, what I wish we could see, just so we can like dig into a little bit more of these details, is like what quarter where these attendances started to drop, because you can go back and you'll look, you know, you can look at the shareholder meetings and it can tell you, profit numbers. They can tell you how they were doing, quarter over quarter in terms of profitability. But in terms of attendance, unfortunately, we don't have access to that information. But what we do know is that in the second quarter of this year, profit was still down 5.2% year over year from 2024. But then once you go into quarter three, once Epic Universe is opened, boom, the profits actually went up 19% for Universal Studios. So even though we're not looking at like hard attendance numbers, so there is a strong demand for Epic Universe, and Jared actually has been talking about this on his channel for like 2 years now, because he actually covered this very extensively. But the pause on attendance for Epic Universe, I think, is the cause of the dip, and we know this why, because profit went up 19% in quarter two. So while we're not looking at attendance numbers, we still have hard data telling us that that's like the correlation is so strong. You could just say this is what's happening.
Well, and in Florida, you guys have a much more of a tourism driven market out there, right? Like in California, that might not necessarily be the case when we have new things on the horizon, because we have a lot of locals who can pop in, pop out at any given time. Really, they're not planning this stuff out a year or two in advance. Where in Florida, when these families are coming from all over the world sometimes, right? So you're planning out your vacation, and if you're like, well, we're going to go to Orlando, do we want to do it in 2024 when we can just wait a year and we can get the new park included in that whole thing? So it does make sense,
Yeah, and I agree with Slimer. I would like to be able to see quarter by quarter. With 2025, I think what you would likely see, and we won't be able to know this unless we, other than revenues, like you were saying, is obviously Epic's had a so far positive impact. I think this next earnings report's gonna be very interesting, because I think there's gonna be another one that's gonna go up quite a bit for Universal. But how is Disney faring? And I think that's going to be the thing of like, that's been the big question about what would the impact be. But yeah, in terms of like looking at them next year, I'm going to assume Universal is going to be up. I don't know how much. Like I said, I'm bad at percentages. I mean, I would assume you might be looking at 5% up at least. And then I think with Disney, you could see them fall off a bit. And I think that could be the challenge too, because it's the same thing with Epic Universe construction and waiting on that. Disney's going to have active construction going on for many years in the parks, and that's going to be an active impedance on people. Currently Epic Universe wasn't messing with people's days at Universal because it was being built off site somewhere else, whereas all this construction going on now, you're going to have to deal with it when you go to the parks, on top of people just being like, why don't we just wait till this stuff's done and then go? And I think that's going to be their challenge in the next little bit.
Absolutely. And then Remedy brings up an interesting point here with Universal Studios Hollywood dropping almost 10%. I think this is in regards to the Super Nintendo World hype kind of coming back down to earth a little bit. Like, because that land opened, I think, in 2023. Now, this is a year later. It's probably that, in my opinion. It's probably because everyone was going, they had, for the Super Mario stuff in 2023. And then 2024, that was kind of dying down. So they saw a dip. That's just my guess, but I don't know.
No, I think you're right, because I think attendance actually did go up like 10%. It was almost double digits, if not over double digits, for when Super Mario will do. And now remember, this happens all the time, right? So it happened to Hollywood Studios with the open Rise of the Resistance. Animal Kingdom was seeing attendance like 11, 12, 13 million when Pandora opened, and now it's down below 9 million. So
Animal Kingdom was the number 2 park in 2019.
Yeah, and Rogue Attraction brings up an interesting observation. The fact that Animal Kingdom and Universal are so close to each other shocks me. I mean, that is pretty shocking. I've always been surprised at how close California Adventure and IOA are every year. They're not too far in attendance, and that always surprised me, because I always felt like IOA is a much more of a full park. I don't know. DCA still seems like there's not a whole lot, in terms of e-tickets and what have you. So that's always surprised me as well.
Compared to IOA?
Yeah. Now I haven't been to Iowa, but based on what I've seen, now what do you think? Am I wrong, Slimer?
Prepare to be disappointed then.
Uh-oh.
Because I think honestly, I think the DCA and Iowa are pretty much on par in terms of their attraction offerings and entertainment.
Well,
wow, that's wild.
And I think if you look at too with Universal, like obviously this is why they've announced the new things that they're building. Rip Ride Rocket replacement, something's happening in Lost Continent, is because they know these numbers before we've even seen them. And if you go to Epic first, then you go to other parks, like there is a drop off in the level of, just the parks, that they're older parks. So I think this is where their game plan here is Epic's going to pull things up, and while they do that, then they build new things in the existing park, because there's a lot of areas of the existing parks of Studios and Islands of Adventure that are underutilized, you could say the least, that you can bring up.
Well, and here's the other thing too about bringing Epic Universe into the mix. Like they're shuffling the cards, right? So while Universal and Iowa are getting 9 and 10 million attendees per year, that could drop relative to the amount of attendance that Epic Universe maximizes at in, let's say, 2, 3, or 4 years from now, which might end up being a combined overall increase in attendance for Universal parks when you factor in Epic Universe's attendance when they finally reach their 100% capacity. But it might also mean that Universal takes a little bit of a dip, and so does Islands of Adventure, at least until they inject another. We were having a conversation about this, Jared, but anywhere between $2 to $4 billion across the other two parks within the next couple of years. But the shuffling of the deck is definitely going to be interesting to see what happens with attendance, because again, Epic Universe is strategically going to be their castle park, if you will. So that's the one that's going to bring in the 12 to 14, 16 million attendees per year. And then what that means for the other two parks, I think really just depends on what their strategic approach is in terms of investment, and whether or not Universal Studios can hit that kind of an attendance cap, considering, with all things considered, the Disney effect, Orlando, inflation, the amount, what does that look like? We really don't know. And again, Disney hasn't built out what they're doing in Magic Kingdom and in Hollywood Studios and the new attractions that are coming to Animal Kingdom. So what that attendance cap looks like, I have no idea. And also, this is another good point I think you brought up. They're not necessarily looking at attendance in Epic Universe because they're capped. They're looking at probably revenue per guest spending, if I had to guess right now. And like you said, they're happy with the numbers.
And they have said that the per guest spending is up since Epic's open. They have I talked to a couple employees that told me that, and then they even said in their earnings call that they are seeing an increase in that. So if they can maximize, kind of like what Disney does, people spending more as they come in, it doesn't take as much of a hit, especially in the short term when they don't have Epic at the cap they want it at. So I think that's where they're kind of, it's funny, Epic's kind of the same boat as Disney, whereas they don't care much about the attendance as they do like the revenue impact. And this is also why they did the ticketing packages the way they did too, is limiting you one day at Epic and having to go to the other parks. So they're helping to push those up, which I think it probably will end up paying off.
Yeah, I think these theme park companies, Disney and Universal, they're definitely looking more at the revenue side of things and focusing less on attendance. I think that's the game plan. Yeah, it is smart. It is smart, 100%.
And it's smart, especially if you want to distinguish yourself as a premium brand compared to all the other theme park offerings out there, because the regional park experience, for better or worse, it's growing, it's shrinking, it's changing. But the one thing that's staying the same is that it's value. And so they're going to have to become more and more premium. And unfortunately, that's just the name of the game, right? I mean, you can have, we've had this conversation before. You can either increase supply or you can lower the demand. And they can lower the demand faster than they can increase the supply, because it takes time to build out these attractions, and they need the cash and they need the investments. And I mean, look, Universal Studios, I mean, they just built a park, and cumulatively last year they lost over 8% in attendance. So how are they going to react to that? Well, it's going to take 3 to 4 years to bounce back from that.
Yeah. Well, and it also goes to their cadence. They had mentioned before that they want a new ride open every single year, and it got interrupted with Epic because obviously you put all the money into that. But I think if they get back on that cadence of a new attraction every year, even post Epic, that I think would be something you would, you're not going to, like you were saying, something comes online, then you see the drop off. Same with the Animal Kingdom, you saw the same thing. So if you're able to, as those things fall off and then get another bump, and I think that's where you see that cumulative effect, almost like compound interest on a stock or your investments. Like that's where, and I think that is where they're looking. And everybody that I've talked to, I know a couple of people that are like up in management. They even say like the goal of Universal is very like long view on this stuff. Like they're not, I don't think they're necessarily just, I don't think they saw this report. First off, I don't think any of this shocked them. I'm sure they already know these numbers, but I get the idea that they're in the long game for this, like 10 years, 15 years down the road, which is why you wouldn't invest $8 billion into a park if you weren't. So I think that, that I think the next 5 years will be interesting to see what's the short-term impact of Epic, and then really what is like, where does it end up once you would say this park's at full power? Like, is it at the same level attendance-wise at Magic Kingdom? Like, that'll be very interesting. But also Disneyland was number 2, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Well, and it wasn't a distant number 2. I mean, it was like this close, you know.
If there's any drop off at Magic Kingdom, I mean, Disneyland might be number 1 next year.
Well, I think that's actually going to be the case, and I'll tell you why. Because tourism was actually up in attendance 2.3% last year. So tourists are coming to Anaheim, but not so much to Universal Hollywood, and so that's making Disneyland look good and Universal look bad.
I think it's thanks to Kendrick Lamar, all that West Coast love. You know, everyone's in the mood for California right now.
It's all Kendrick. I agree. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to look at this stuff, and for me, nothing about this was surprising. But again, I don't really, if you watch my stuff, like I don't try and predict numbers. I'm always bad at numbers. I kind of am more like trends and way things are kind of going. I don't know if I would have said I thought IOA was down 5%, which is pretty significant. But I think it'd be curious how much ground they can make up in what. But it's like you said, OG, it's gonna be weird because Epic didn't come online until May. Right. So anybody expecting like a massive jump, I'm not going to predict that they're going to see this like, vertical rocket for their attendance. But I think where you could see it is 2026, 2027 time period, maybe is whenever, and again, this is all going to depend on, are they able to get these wait times down? And we could talk about this after this, but they released about Epic Universe next year. There's still no AP option. I don't think you see it till 2027 at this point, unless something drastically changes with the park. So if you can't even get annual pass holders in here, you're not going to hit attendance records. So you're basically just you're just obviously trying to get more out of each guest coming through in the short term.
Now, do you guys feel, because I'm in California, I've been to Walt Disney World. I haven't been to the Universal Orlando parks. But do you guys feel that Universal did enough, though, like adding and plussing the Studio Park and IOA in the lead up to Epic Universe? Because I feel like it got attractions, it got stuff, right? I'm not going to say they didn't. They got Villain Con and they got Velocicoaster, but really they haven't had a major expansion since Diagon Alley, which is 11 years ago now. Do you think they could have done a little more to kind of offset, like, going into this big expansion? I think that you kind of need, because I've talked about cannibalization a lot, like on my channel and stuff, where it's like you're going to have the shiny new thing down the street, and the other two parks really haven't had a ton of investment. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, obviously, I think you can always do better. I think from my understanding from talking to them, it was like all hands on deck to get Epic done. And then it's kind of like, let's play catch up with the other parks. Now, I don't know if that's the best strategy. That just seems like the route that they took. Because you look at Villain Con, I get what they were going for, but it's not the best. Even our kids don't even like it. Like, it's just kind of like a whatever ride. The DreamWorks Land retheme was like, you could tell that it was a low budget thing just to have something open. They could have done more. I mean, the Velocicoaster thing, but IOA and both studios have a lot of areas that they could definitely bring up to par. But I think they may be just saying, hey, let's push all our chips in on Epic. And then I guess you could say your hope there is like that has enough of a boost in the short term that gives you time to go back to the existing parks to bring those up. And then maybe in 10 years, you're kind of in the same spot either way, maybe is the thinking. But I mean, I think they could have done more. But I don't know. What do you think, Slammer?
Well, I think the Comcast actually has a big problem, and they have a really big problem in the terms of debt. And if you look at their debt, all right, they're sitting at over $90 billion with a B and that includes cash flow. Okay. Uh, they're kind of broke from a debt perspective. I mean, they hold way too much debt. So what that means is this: it means that they cannot do the same amount of capital investment that Disney has the luxury of doing because Disney actually has positive cash flow. Comcast is sitting on $90 billion in debt. So if they were to do 10 to $15 billion in investments into their parks, you're looking at adding 10% of their existing debt on the books. And that's why these regional parks are a really good idea, because they can build these things and in like the first 2 years they're already profiting off of their return on investment, because
Yeah.
they only need to make like what, $100 million a year,
Yeah.
So
The park overall is like 500 million to build, I believe. So in terms of theme parks, not that expensive. But yeah.
No, and they'll profit in 5 years. But in terms of Epic Universe, they're going to probably look at a longer return on investment on Epic. And then with regard to Islands of Adventure, OG, the problem that I think the Universal has is that they're so forward thinking when it comes to how to capitalize on the biggest pop culture, not just in America but globally. I think they're waiting till the last minute to make a decision on how they want to invest on an IP that is going to push their parks forward 5 to 10 years. Right now, with Warner Brothers being on the table, and now knowing what they know about how to combat Disney in terms of attendance over in Japan, because Universal Studios actually had higher attendance than Tokyo Disney Sea. Right.
That's true. They did. Yeah.
Right. Why? Because they're leaning into buying the licensing rights for Japanese IP. They're leaning really hard in all the manga and the Demon Slayer and all that stuff. Okay. And even in Halloween Horror Nights too. Like if you go to the Halloween Horror Nights in Japan, a lot of it's Japanese as well. I mean, they have some American stuff, but it's different.
It's even Japanese out here. Like for our fan fest, it was like Jujutsu Kaisen and One Piece, and it's crazy, right? Go ahead, sorry, bro.
No, you're good. You're good. So now that they've looked at the attendance drop of Islands of Adventure, I want to really like isolate on that one, because Iowa is their second biggest park. Right. Do you think that this is do you think is informing Universal Comcast on which direction they should lead when trying to decide, hey, do we forego Warner Brothers and all these great IPs and go more towards the Asian market, which seems to be more of a global market right now? Or do we go head on in Warner Brothers and try to pick up, some of the licensing rights that they have, pivot one way versus another? And do you think it's going to be based off of the attendance numbers of 2024?
I would like to see a little bit of both, to be honest with you. I love when they lean into the Asian entertainment, right? Like the anime and all that stuff. I love that. But at the same time, I also think it would be great if they had a lot of this Warner Brothers IP under their belt. I kind of want to see a little mix of both. I mean, anime has always been popular to some degree, right? But right now it's exceptionally popular. But is it going to remain exceptionally popular in 20 years? Or is it going to kind of come back down to earth a little bit? I'm guessing it's probably going to come back down to earth a little bit. It's going to ebb and flow. So I wouldn't go, if I was Universal, I wouldn't put like all my eggs in that basket, but I would definitely lean into it to some degree. You can't ignore it. You know what I'm saying? But I wouldn't depend too much on it though, because in 10, 15 years, I mean, it might not be the hottest thing anymore. And now you have a whole park of like a bunch of anime stuff that isn't really the hot item. Remember, a decade ago, superhero stuff was the hottest thing ever. And now look, it's like, it's kind of waning.
Yeah, that could. I mean, I don't think 2024 numbers have any impact on it. If I were to guess, I don't think neither Disney nor Universal are surprised by any of those. If it is an either or, which maybe they're having internal discussions. If it is an either or, do we buy Warner Brothers or do we go more anime? If that was the case, that's a very interesting conversation, because I think obviously anime is trending upwards, but I think OG's point is true. You don't know the longevity of these things. Like they could fall off, but they could also become massive and have even more cultural, acceptance. And I think that would be your gamble. When it comes to the whole Comcast looking at Warner Brothers, it's like I think they're looking at the Wizarding Worlds as the biggest thing that's happened to their parks, and the last thing you would want is for those rights to be tied up with another company and have to renegotiate with. And then if you have opportunity to get them, I mean, you may never get this shot again. But the debt load, I've had the same thing. I'm like, the debt load, would it be approved? Like, there's lots of questions around anybody buying Warner Brothers at this point.